Hey, good morning, Reach Church. Super glad you're here with us today. My name is Cullen. I'm the lead pastor. If I didn't get a chance to meet you, just want to personally welcome you here. Also want to welcome those joining us online today. And I got to tell you, if you have never been a part of one of those trips, those mission trips, global impact trips in partnership with SOS, wow, I'm telling you, I've been on so many of those in different parts of the world. It literally will change your life. And Johannes Amritzer, he is one of our key and significant global impact partners. And as I'm thinking about that, I also remember back in 2019, me and Pastor Jeff, we took a trip to Kilgoris, Kenya, to meet with Johannes Amritzer, all right? And this trip was to really scout out the land that was going to eventually be used for the Kilgoris Bible School. And so we were casting vision, we were, talking about things, we were praying, and I gotta tell you, now when I go on that property and I teach there and I do ministry, I just go, thank you, Reach Church, because I was there when it was just grass and nothing. And now you've helped to build that thing up, and that continues to produce results day after day, week after week, year after year, because we're raising up missionaries and pastors and we're sending them out. So thank you for that investment, Reach Church. It is producing incredible results. Well, so after we were there that particular week, we were there again about 7 or so days. And after we had been working all week, on one of our last days, we went with Johannes to the Masai Mara, okay? Now, I don't know if you know anything about the Masai Mara, but there's a lot of wild animals on the Masai Mara, okay? Now, when I'm talking wild animals, I'm talking about cheetahs, I'm talking about leopards, lions, zebras, giraffes, elephants, hippos, those kind of animals, all right? There's not like fences around there. This is not a zoo. This is like the wild. Everybody say the wild. Okay, that's what this is, okay? Just wild animals all over the place. And so we came upon, he was driving us, and this is about an hour and a half from Kilgoris, and we came upon the Mara River. The Mara River is a very famous river. Maybe you've seen it about that on the National Geographic Channel or whatever. But famous river. We came upon the Mara River, and Johannes, he pulled over to the side, and he goes, let's get out just for a little bit here. Let's explore. And when he said that, he also said, and around this area, we really need to be careful, okay? And let me just kind of say, for those of you who know Johannes, he's been a friend of mine for about 20 years, and he comes to Reach Church, a couple times a year. How many of you have heard Johannes speak? A lot of, yeah, if you've been to Reach Church, you've heard Johannes, all right, okay? Well, so as we're getting out of the truck, I'm thinking, what does he mean by be careful? What does he mean that we need to be careful around here, okay? So as we just kind of started to walk a little bit, I leaned over and I'm like, so what do you mean about we need to be careful around here? Are you talking about wild animals? And he looked at me and he goes, yes. Okay, all right. Then I looked at him and I said, what are we doing outside of the truck? Okay, because I think we'd be a lot better off inside the truck. And then he leaned over to me, and in his, accent, he's like, Cullen, it's going to be an adventure. Can you hear him say that? And I look back at him, and I'm like, yeah, an adventure and us being eaten. Like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on, okay? But then Johannes, and I'm going to also say Pastor Jeff, okay? Because Pastor Jeff was started to be in his camp. He's like, yeah, let's go on an adventure. And so it's 2 against 1. It's 2 against 1, all right? What am I going to do? So Johannes at this time, all of a sudden, Johannes, he gets serious at this moment. And he says, I really need to tell you what to do in case a hippopotamus starts chasing us. And I'm like, if you need to say those words out of your mouth, we are in the wrong place at the wrong time. And just to be honest, like hippopotamus, they're the leading cause of death by animal in Africa. So they're very violent. They attack when you don't even realize it. You don't always see them because they're right underwater. They just come up and start chasing you. They're very violent and unpredictable. And so he's like, in all seriousness, he said, if we start getting chased by a hippopotamus, he said, don't just run straight. They're going to outrun you and they're going to eat you. He said, what you have to do is you run and then you cut real quick. And you cut real quick. You make a bunch of cuts. He says, because they're large animals and they can't follow your cuts that you're making. And I'm just sitting there and I'm going, what? Like, this is a true story. And then he says, then you got to be careful because if you're making a bunch of cuts and we're going around these bushes, you also have to watch out for lions. just like offering myself up to Jesus, like right in that moment. I'm like, okay, God, like, what is going on? And so this is what's happening. We're he's telling us all this stuff, and I'm like, guys, I think we should go back to the truck. But then they want to continue on here, and so we kind of continue on a little bit, and I'm just like doing 360 stuff like this, like what's going on? What is happening? And Johannes is excited about this great adventure, but I'm falling for peer pressure in this moment, 2 against 1, and this is what's happening. And as we got further away from the truck, I could barely see the truck, and now I'm at my limit. I'm like, I could barely see it, and I'm like, I looked at both of them, Pastor Jeff and Johannes. I said, guys, and I got serious, this is insane. And Johannes looked back at me with a little smile on his face, and he goes, Cullen, is this a warning from the Holy Spirit? Or is this fear speaking? And I said, it's common sense speaking. Let's go back to the truck now. And I grabbed both of them and I said, come on, let's go. And I had to almost drag them, but we got back to the truck against their will. But can I tell you that we lived to see another day? You can thank me that Pastor Jeff is still alive right now. I'm just saying. You can thank me that Johannes is still alive, okay? Just saying. Have you ever been in a situation, okay, where you were influenced by pressure from the people around you? All of us have, right? We all have. We've all been in situations where we've been pressured. And when we do that, when we're in those situations, sometimes we actually violate a principle that we want to live by because of the pressure that we're feeling from the people around us. That's what happens. And in that situation with Johannes and Pastor Jeff, okay, we were violating the principle of common sense and safety. How many of you would agree with that? Come on. How many of you would agree with that? All right, there we go. You're scared to do that because I mentioned Pastor Jeff's name. It's okay. He's not seeing whose hands are raised right now in this moment. But this is the idea that I want to talk about today, okay? It's important to live by principles instead of being influenced by pressure. It's important to live by principles instead of being influenced by pressure. Now, this is a valuable topic to discuss because honestly, when we don't live this way, when we don't live by principles, it turns out very bad, and it almost turns out really bad for others around us too when we live more influenced by the pressure over principles. So think back to a time that you were influenced by pressure instead of living by sound principles. And I'm not trying to like dig up stuff in your life. We're not trying to go, dig up a bunch of hurt. I just want to kind of help us understand something to get our minds in the right place. If you just come across one of those moments, just think about one of those moments. It's likely, okay, that you regret the decisions that you made out of pressure instead of the decisions that you could have made out of principle in those moments, because they probably violated one of your principles. Sometimes we end up paying the price for those decisions for not just days or weeks, but sometimes we actually end up paying the price for those principles for years to come, for a long time, okay? But I just got to tell you, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. I actually want to show you a different way to live. And this is the last message in the series called The Chosen. As we're looking at some of the stories about the life and ministry of Jesus. Next week, I'm starting a brand new series called What About Spiritual Gifts? It's going to be a really interesting series. We're going to go back into 1 Corinthians to journey through that. But today, we're going to look at a story of Jesus that's found in 3 different Gospels. They all kind of give a different angle of this story. It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And let's watch a video clip of how this story goes.
No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever. Because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way.
Shalom.
Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever.
May I see?
Because they did not meet you with bread and with what? Excuse me, what are you doing?
What is your name?
Elam.
Your friend Elam has a withered hand.
Are you a healer?
It is not lawful to heal on Sabbath.
Which Which one of you who has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath will not take hold of it and lift it out?
Who are you to speak to our congregation in such a
Of
way?
how much more value is this man than a sheep?
Stop this at once.
Come here. Come stand here. It's okay.
Elam, sit down. We don't know this person. He could be a shaman.
Is it lawful on Sabbath to do good or to do harm? To save life or to kill?
This affliction does not threaten his life.
It does not even affect his health.
Lift it up. Stretch it out. Feels good, huh?
If he was supposed to be healed, God would have done it himself.
Interesting point.
Get out.
Gladly.
Blasphemer!
What is wrong with you?
Apparently everything.
Wait! Come back!
What a cool story, right? I love the Bible. It's full of drama and controversy, excitement, and a lot of meaning as well. Let's look at the biblical text of that story to get an even better grasp on it. We'll look at two different sections of the Gospels. First one in Luke chapter 6, verses 6 through 9. It says, "On another Sabbath day, a man with a deformed right hand was in the synagogue while Jesus was teaching. The teachers of religious law and the Pharisees watched Jesus closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew their thoughts. He said to the man with the deformed hand, 'Come and stand in front of everyone.' So the man came forward. Then Jesus said to his critics, 'I have a question for you. Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is this a day to save life or destroy it?' Then we're going to look at the rest of the story out of Matthew's gospel, Matthew chapter 12, verses 11 through 14. Then Jesus answered, 'If you had a sheep that fell into a well on the Sabbath, wouldn't you work to pull it out? Of course you would. And how much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Yes, the law permits a person to do good on the Sabbath.' Then he said to the man, 'Hold out your hand,' or stretch out your hand. So the man held out his hand, and it was restored just like the other one. Then the Pharisees called a meeting to plot how to kill Jesus." He heals somebody, they want to kill him. Like, look at that, crazy, right? Jesus, he shows us how it's important to live by principles instead of being influenced by pressure that's all around you all the time. So we're going to unpack this story to see the principles that Jesus is teaching us. And the first principle is this: we want to prioritize health and wholeness over legalism. Okay, we prioritize health and wholeness over legalism. So just a little context about this. The Sabbath day was a day of rest where no work was supposed to be done. And the religious leaders, they had gone to crazy extremes. So the Pharisees and Sadducees, they were groups of people who were religious leaders. And they started going to these extreme measures and making rules about what you could do and what you could not do on the Sabbath. Okay, it became more about the rules than the purpose or the principle of the actual day itself. Okay, and that turned into legalism. They were more concerned about the letter of the law than the purpose of the law. And what I've found out, when people start getting religious and they start making a bunch of rules and regulations and they forget about the purpose of it all, those can be some of the meanest people on the planet. Religious people, they can. It's like terrible. It's like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And that's what was happening in this situation. Kind of makes me think back to when I was a kid. Our family rule, one of the family rules that we had when I grew up, was that you can't watch TV while you're eating a meal. Well, why was that? Well, because the purpose of the meal, we looked at that as a family connection time, and the TV would just kind of distract us and whatever. So we said, hey, no TV, and so we just wanted to connect with the family during those moments. So that's what we did. And I got to be honest, I didn't like that rule as a kid. I thought it was stupid because I wanted to watch TV when I wanted to watch TV. But then when I became a parent, I actually thought that was a really good rule. So I implemented that with my family when my kids were younger. Said, hey, we're going to just not have TV going on, so we can have family connection during our meal times. We wanted that uninterrupted time. Well, we did that, but we made a change to that rule, quote unquote. Because one of the things we would often do together as a family is we would watch Pittsburgh Steelers games together, all right? Watch football. We love football as a family. So when the Steelers would play, we would actually eat a meal while we watched the game. Super fun. It was pretty amazing. And guess what? It actually facilitated the principle of family connection. So we weren't so focused on the rule that we forgot the purpose or the principle behind it. The purpose and the principle was family connection. And we said we can eat and connect as a family even better as we're watching the Steelers. So we said, let's incorporate food into this. It becomes like a party, okay? And guess what? We still do the same thing to this day. We eat and we watch the Steelers. It's a great family experience. Well, sometimes when they win. But that hasn't happened much recently, right? But we do this. It's fun as a family, okay? So as we think about the story we're reading from the Bible here today, they had laws that allowed you to rescue an animal from a pit, or if it fell into one of these big wells, okay, you could rescue that animal on the Sabbath day. But they said you can't heal somebody if their life is not in danger on the Sabbath day. I mean, think about that, right? In this man's life, it wasn't in danger. He had a paralyzed or some kind of deformed arm. So if that wasn't healed on that day, he could live another day. So technically, you could kind of postpone that, and there wouldn't be a problem with that. But Jesus is pointing out all these inconsistencies, okay? Like you can rescue an animal out of a pit, but you can't heal a human being on the Sabbath if it's not a life or death situation. He's like, what is your problem? Like, can you not see what the issue is here? I mean, he's showing them how absurd it is. These crazy rules and these beliefs they put into place because they became so focused on the rules, they forgot the purpose or the principle behind the rules. Can you see that? And then we pick up or look again at Matthew chapter 12, verses 11 and 12. And he answered them. He said, look, guys, if you had a sheep that fell into a well on the Sabbath, wouldn't you work to pull it out? And it's a rhetorical question because the obvious answer is yes. Okay? Then he said, how much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Yes, the law permits a person to do good on the Sabbath. So Jesus is telling us it is always, everybody say always. It's always appropriate to do good, no matter what day it is, on the Sabbath and every single other day that's out there. Let's do good. And so if we're so locked up on the definition of work, quote unquote, that you can't determine whether you should do something that is good, then you've lost the meaning of it all. It's one of the things he's saying here. So Jesus actually prioritized health and wellness over legalism and rules. Okay, legalism and rules does not produce life inside of anybody. It's death. It's horrible. It's terrible. I don't want any part of legalism. I don't want any part of rules like that. No, I want to have a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus prioritized health and wellness over legalism and rules. The purpose of that day was actually health and wellness. That was the intended purpose, but they had lost the meaning of it because they were more concerned about rules than the people who the rules were supposed to be created for. And Jesus' message was, it's always good to do something positive on the Sabbath and every other day of the week. So let's err on the side of goodness instead of erring on the side of heartless rules and regulations. Now remember, Jesus demonstrated this principle in a controversial way on a controversial day intentionally. He was wanting to show how much he valued the health and wellness of each person. He wanted to make it super clear that this is a value of his, and so he said, I'm going to perform this miracle and this healing on the Sabbath. Health and wellness was the intended purpose of that day. So Jesus wanted to reinforce his will and desire that was supposed to represent that day, which was health and wellness. So he's actually communicating that it's God's will and his desire for us to experience health, wholeness, and wellness. That's God's desire for you. You know, sometimes I think we often approach this topic of healing and health or sickness and miracles from different perspectives than what Jesus approaches it from. Sometimes we say things like this. We're like, well, is it really God's will for me to be healed? Maybe this sickness is something I'm just supposed to live with. I hear people say that sometimes. Maybe I'm just supposed to live with this sickness. Or people say, well, when I pray, maybe I should say, well, God, if it's your will, if it's your plan, then take this sickness from me. Or they say, maybe God's trying to teach me something through this sickness, through this pain, or whatever, so I'll just accept it. Because maybe God's trying to teach me something through this. Or we say phrases like, oh, this is such a common phrase that people say. They say, well, you know what? Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. And what is often meant by that is, I got this sickness for some reason that God only knows about. Or I have this pain in my body or this disease or whatever for a reason that only God knows about. And I'm not healed because God must want it that way. So everything happens for a reason. Can I tell you that theology is not found in the Bible? People say that all the time. That is not biblical theology. In fact, the phrase everything happens for a reason, many of those reasons are not God's reasons. Many of those reasons are plans of the enemy that he wants to see happen. And we're getting it wrong. We're attributing those things to God. Oh, it just happens for a reason. God must want it that way. No! Many times the will of the enemy is happening in our world instead of the will of God. I could preach an entire message about that. But I'm just kind of throwing it in there to help us think more in line with the Bible today. Another thing we can often do when we talk about this subject is we point out situations where maybe a healing didn't happen or a miracle didn't happen, and then we use that as our belief system over healing in general. Oh, healing's not for everybody because someone didn't get healed. Or we use our own experiences as the basis for our beliefs on this subject instead of using the Bible as the basis for what we believe about the topic of healing. Because what we see from the Bible is that health and wholeness is God's plan for everybody. That's what God wants. He wants that for our lives. What he wants for you is what he wants for me. But we have to believe that in order to experience that. I got to tell you something awesome. Over the past 12 months, we have at least 35 documented stories of people who have received a healing through what God is doing right here at Reach Church. Over 35 documented healings. That's incredible. That's wonderful. And those are just the ones we know about. There's probably so many other ones that we don't know. Those are just the ones we know about. And so we want you to let us know when God heals you, when you have a healing. Let us know so we can celebrate with you. That's a wonderful thing. Now, I got to admit, I don't know or understand everything about this topic. I want to be the first one to say that because I get a little hesitant when I hear some people act like they know everything there is to know about this topic because it's a complex topic. And I'm just going to be the first to tell you, I do not know everything there is to know about this. I don't think anybody will while they're on the earth. Maybe once we get to heaven, then we can understand everything about that. But there's questions that come up, right? I have questions sometimes. What do we do when we've been praying and we've been believing and we've been having faith and there's still not a healing? What do we do in those moments, right? Well, here's my answer. We keep going for it. We keep going for it. We don't give up. We don't stop. And there might be people here in this room today. There's probably things you're navigating or maybe a sickness or disease or whatever it is. And you've been praying and believing and you haven't been healed yet. So I want to be sensitive to that. And I also want to say, I don't understand it all. I can't even explain it all. But my encouragement to us is let's keep believing for it. Let's keep going for it. Because I choose personally to believe what the Bible says about healing instead of allowing my experiences to dictate what I believe about healing. I'm letting the Bible dictate. And so I'm saying, let's go for it. Let's declare the healing power of Jesus over our lives. And that's kind of part of the point of this story. The health and wellness of each person is actually a high priority to God. It's a high priority. It's a super high priority for him. It's actually his plan ultimately. And I get it, we live in an imperfect world, right? All around us is imperfections all over the place. But can we believe and embrace the truth today that God's ultimate plan for us is health, wholeness, and wellness? Can we receive that today? Man, I want that for you. God wants that for you. Jesus really shows us how it's important to live by principles instead of being influenced by pressure that's around us all the time. So the second principle is this. He demonstrates courage despite the critics. He demonstrates courage despite the critics. In Mark 3:3, Jesus said to the man with the deformed hand, "Come and stand in front of everyone." So the Bible already told us that Jesus was surrounded by critics, and they were watching him so closely because they were going to catch him, quote unquote, catch him healing on the Sabbath day and then accuse him, right? So it would have been easy for Jesus to kind of be stealth on that day. He knew the critics were there. He knew people were watching him. He knew his enemies were right there. So it would have been wise, we would have thought, for Jesus to kind of be stealth on that day. Play it cool, low key, no confrontation. Don't do anything that's going to stir it up, Jesus, right? But Jesus did the opposite. He's like, no, I'm going for it. He did the opposite. He asked the man with the deformed hand to come and stand in front of everyone in the synagogue. It would like be me saying, having that person come up and stand on stage here today in front of the hundreds of people, right, that are here. He was putting things on full display even though he knew he was going to face opposition because he knew what was coming. He knew what was coming down the pike right after he did that. And he performed a miracle that everybody saw in the synagogue, especially his critics. He could have done that in the corner. Jesus, go in the corner, go in that dark place, go in the back row. Hey, I tell you what, maybe just step right outside. Like just go right outside, where nobody is. They're not going to see it. Then do the miracle out there. The guy can still be healed, have his wonderful life, but you do it outside rather than right there in the synagogue. But guess what? He did it on the front row. On the front row. Everybody say front row. Just love that. Love the courage that defined the life of Jesus. He was willing to stand alone for what pleased God when literally everyone else around him believed something different and was doing something different. Your ability to stand alone for what pleases God, is actually one of the most important principles that will define your life. Your ability to stand alone for what pleases God when nobody else is one of the most important principles that will define your life. I'm telling you, it's so important. I read about an experiment that was done in 1956. There was a professor and a group of college students, and everyone had been explained and kind of briefed on what was going to happen, everybody except one particular student. One particular student, they didn't know, they didn't get the inside scoop on what was happening. And the goal was to see if people would have the courage to stand alone with the correct answers to obvious questions, even when other people said something different. That was the kind of experiment. And the experiment involved showing answers that were easy and obvious. Okay, and here's one of the images that they showed people. Okay, and the idea was, you see the line on the left, we want to identify the line on the right that matches the line on the left. And it's an obvious, I'm not even going to ask here because it's obvious. We all know that letter A matches the line on the left, right? No, I'm just kidding. It's C. We know that, right? So it's C. So everybody in the class was privately instructed, though, to say that B matches the line on the left. They were told, hey, everybody say that B matches except this one student, okay? And that was kind of, the whole experiment. One student didn't know about this, but everybody else did. And so they did this same thing with a number of groups of students, and they found that 76% of participants went along with the answers that everyone else gave, even though they knew it was obviously wrong. So 76% of the people, right, that one student, they saw everybody else, they went last, right? That one student went last, and they saw everybody else raise their hand when they said, yeah, is the line on the left, it matches B. Does it match B? And everybody raised their hands. And the student's like, which line do you think it matches? Well, okay, I guess I'll say it matches B too. although they knew it didn't. Why? The pressure. The pressure around them. 76% of the participants did that at least one time, although they knew the answer was wrong. You see, even in obvious situations, it's difficult for most people to have the courage to stand alone for what they know is right, what is obviously right. Will you be one of the few who are willing to have the courage to stand alone for what pleases God when nobody else will? Or will you sacrifice your integrity and your future just to fit in on a temporary place on the journey of life? What are you going to do? We face so many situations every single week that require the courage to stand alone. If you don't act on that courage, your moral compass is going to erode. You will miss out on opportunities from God. Your godly influence on others is going to be reduced. You will compromise your values and principles. And guess what? You're probably going to live with a lot of unnecessary regret. You will find yourself having to pick up broken pieces of your life that didn't have to be broken. You will sacrifice your future in exchange for a moment. Can I just tell you? Don't sacrifice a moment in exchange for your future. Don't do that. It's not worth it. Instead, live with courage. Live with courage. Have the backbone to stand up for what pleases God, even when nobody else is. Oh, this is a principle. It's so important for every person at every age. Students at school, stand up for what pleases God. No matter what everybody else is doing. In your friendship circles, it's so important. Young adults, parents, grandparents, come on, let's go. At your job, decisions that could impact your role. I get it, but will you have the courage to stand alone for what pleases God? In your neighborhood, in your conversations, in your free time, in your family. You see, these decisions, it often involves things like money, like resources, maybe finances. It involves relationships. It involves our entertainment and what we're doing, right? It involves gossip, telling the truth, and a whole lot more. Jesus shows us how it's important to live by principles instead of being influenced by pressure that's around us every day. Let's have a backbone to live with courage. Final principle, number 3, we access miracles through action-oriented faith. In Luke chapter 6, that part of the story, verse 6, it says, on another Sabbath day, a man with a deformed right hand was in the synagogue while Jesus was teaching. We know that already. We've seen that. But the word deformed in this verse, when it's describing the condition of the man's hand, actually means withered. It literally means dry, like withered and dry, which really shows us that his hand was lifeless, probably paralyzed. A lifeless, paralyzed hand. And then in Matthew, let's look at Matthew 12:13, the other part of this particular story. Jesus said to the man, hold out your hand or stretch out your hand. So the man held out his hand and it was restored just like the other one. A miracle happened. So because this man's hand was lifeless, again, probably paralyzed, it's obvious he could not move it. So it seems strange for Jesus to say, stretch out your hand. Why would he do that? He obviously can't move his hand. And he's asking the man to do something he obviously cannot do. Like, who on the planet would ask this man to stretch out his hand when everybody knows he's paralyzed? Like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? I mean, it almost seems insulting, right? It seems cruel, like insulting. Is Jesus trying to put pressure on this guy? Is he trying to embarrass this dude? Like, what's happening? And this brings us to one of the other tension points in the story, because there's tension here. Like, there's tension. Why would you do this? Every good story has tension. Why would you do this, Jesus? There's a lot of thoughts that are going through my mind. So it brings us to one of the 2 tension points I want to close with. One of these tension points is faith. Faith is always a tension point. What we see is that a miracle often takes place when there is action-oriented faith involved. It often occurs, a miracle often happens at the moment when you attempt to do something you actually could not do before. That's the faith part of it. Why? Because God operates off the principle of faith. This means we need to believe it before we see it or experience it. But a lot of people say, I tell you what, I'll believe it once I see it. Well, that's not faith. It's basically knowledge. I have knowledge of it now. Faith is when we practice it, we believe it before we actually see it. That's faith. You know, we told a story a few weeks ago about how Vicky Pettigrew, she attends our church. She had tendonitis in her hand and her wrist. It was causing her pain for quite some time, and she couldn't move her wrist without pain. Well, we were celebrating communion back in December, just a couple months ago, as we did today. And as we celebrate communion, we're recognizing what Jesus did for us on the cross, which also releases the healing power of Jesus as well. We were celebrating communion. As we did, she felt a tingling sensation happen in her wrist. In that moment, she began to test it out and begin to move it in ways she could not move it before. And as she began to move it, she realized she had no more pain, and God healed her right there in that moment, right here, as we were celebrating communion just a couple months ago. And that's awesome. We celebrate that. Super cool. Super cool. And God's been doing so many things like that, so many miracles. And somebody was just telling me, we'll share this maybe at another time, but during the greeting time a while ago, somebody was telling me, God did this miracle in my life, this day. I won't tell you what it is. We'll save it for another time. You got to come back to hear it. But just so cool. I'm hearing miracle stories all the time as we're praying for people. But this was like a compatible healing of a wrist, of a hand, like we read about in this story here today. And this is why we often encourage people to try to do something that you couldn't do or that caused you pain prior to being prayed for. Because it's this idea of faith. The miracle often takes place in the moment where there is faith mixed with action. Maybe there's some people here, you need to put your faith into action. This is a principle not just for physical healing, but it's a life principle as well. Maybe you need to act on something by faith before you see it, before you see the evidence of it, before you know it's firm, but you need to act on it in advance. Maybe you've been hesitant, but God's saying, hey, today I want you to act. Could be a decision that you know you need to make by faith, but you've been delaying on that decision. Maybe it's you need to step into tithing or generous giving that you haven't stepped into yet. And God's like, by faith, come on, watch what I'm going to do and bless you with your finances. Maybe it's something else God's told you to do, but you haven't yet obeyed. And he's like, come on, by faith, let's go for it. Step out in action-oriented faith and watch what God will do. The second point of tension in the last one we're going to look at here in this part of the story is what I'm going to call the what if factor. It's the what if factor. I hear so many people, they say things like, but what if I act? Or what if I step out in faith? Or what if I receive prayer? Or what if I do this and nothing happens? Well, then it wouldn't be too much different than the situation you're in right now, would it? What have you got to lose? Okay? But can I say, if you are desperate enough for a miracle, if you are hungry enough for a miracle, if you really want to live a spirit-empowered life, if you really want things to change, then you'll go for it. Then you'll put your faith into action. You'll say, come on, I'm going for it. Let's do this thing. And can I even propose to you that we're asking the wrong question? If you're asking, what if nothing happens if I keep praying? What if nothing happens if I pray for this person? What if nothing happens if I receive prayer? What if nothing happens if I step out in faith when I act? What if nothing happens? If that's the question you are asking, can I tell you that is a question of doubt? It's doubting. And God doesn't move through doubt. God moves through faith. So the more that we're speaking that out of our mouth, what if it doesn't happen? Or the more we're thinking about it and we meditate on that, what if it doesn't happen? Guess what? We are meditating on doubt. We are thinking about doubt. We are operating in the realm of doubt. We are speaking in the realm of doubt. And guess what? God operates in the realm of faith. Not in the realm of doubt. So by our very, what if nothing happens? What if this, we are preventing God from moving because we are living in the realm of doubt, and we got to step from doubt into the realm of faith. So we got to ask a different question than what we've been asking. So what if we ask the question, what if something does happen? What if something does happen? What about the possibilities of what God can do? Because you see, that is a question of faith. and removing ourselves from a place of doubt where we're keeping God and preventing him from moving to a place of faith where we're saying, yes, God, I'm allowing you and I'm putting myself in a position for you to move. Because God moves through faith. So we've been asking the wrong question. And when we ask the wrong question, we get wrong results. Today, let's start asking the right questions. Today, let's ask the questions of faith so we can position ourselves to start seeing the results of faith. How many of you are with me today? Come on, let's do this. Can we all stand to our feet? Let's all stand to our feet here real quick. And I'm going to ask if nobody could leave just for a couple seconds, because I want to ask you the most important question I could ever ask you in your entire life. And as we're standing to our feet, maybe let's just turn our face towards heaven like this. We can kind of focus on God and what he wants to do right now in our hearts in this moment, because I want to give you an opportunity to accept Jesus into your life by faith today, okay? Because Jesus came not only to give you health and wholeness physically, which he wants that for you. He does because he loves you, cares for you. Okay, but most importantly, he came to give us spiritual health and wholeness. Spiritual health and wholeness. Because you see, when we were born into this world, you could say that we were kind of born wrong because we were born into sin, all of us. Jesus told a religious leader, Nicodemus, he said, Nicodemus, you must be born again to enter heaven. You must be born again to have a relationship with God. Nicodemus was probably one of the best dudes on the planet Earth. He was religious. He was doing all these wonderful things. But Jesus said, your first birth, your natural birth into the world isn't good enough. You got to be born again. And this is a spiritual transformation that only Jesus can provide. Why? Because God sent Jesus as his only son to this earth. He was the only perfect person to walk this earth. And he died on the cross and he rose again from the dead. He took our place because he loved you so much. And what Jesus was telling Nicodemus is, there's a spiritual birth that only God can produce in our life. Nobody else can do that. No other thing can do that. Your good works, not enough to produce that, because we're all born into sin. It's a problem. It separates us from God. Jesus is the only person that can give you this spiritual life, this new birth, so you can know you're on your way to heaven, so you can have a brand new life. And Jesus is right here today. He's saying, I want to give you this spiritual life, this brand new life, and there's only one way you can get it. What do? How do you get it? You simply receive it. And today, if you want to receive it, maybe you're here for the first time, or maybe you've never committed your life to Jesus, and today's going to be your day. In a moment, you're going to say, yes, I'm going to receive Jesus. He's going to come in and give you a spiritual life, and you're going to be transformed on your way to heaven. Or maybe you're here today, and you made this decision a long time ago, and maybe you're far from God right now, and today you need to come back to God and receive this new life that he has to offer. So whether you're coming back to Jesus or it's a first-time decision for Jesus, when I count to 3, don't miss this moment. Best decision you could ever make in your entire life. If this is you, and you say, I want to receive Jesus and know that I have this spiritual life on the inside of me. When I count to 3, come on, just shoot your hand up. This is an awesome thing. We're going to celebrate. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Come on, shoot your hand up. Yeah, yes, 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 yes. Come on, others. You say, I want to receive Jesus for the first time. Or maybe, yes, that's awesome, fantastic. Others, you say, I want to know I have Jesus in my life. Other people here, come put your hand up high so I can see it. Yes, that's wonderful. I sense there's maybe a couple other people. Don't miss this moment. Anybody else? You say, I want to know for sure I have Jesus in my life today. Anybody else here? Oh, this is beautiful. Can we all pray this prayer together out loud, whether you raised your hand or not? Let's all say this with me. Say, Jesus, I love you. I believe you died on the cross and you rose again from the dead because you love me, because you care for me. Come into my life. I receive your forgiveness. Have your way in me. I commit myself to you fully and completely. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. Wow, man. I just want to say congratulations. We celebrate you. Best decision you could ever make in your life. And we want to help supercharge your new relationship with Jesus. So I want to put one of these little booklets in your hands. I actually wrote this called Following Jesus. Kind of gives you some next steps. And again, supercharge your brand new relationship with Jesus. Pastor Kyle is right there in the back. He's raising his hand. He's going to step right into the lobby right now so we can put one of these in your hand. So I'm going to ask everyone, maybe you know the person in front of you, beside you, behind you, or maybe you don't, but I'm just going to ask everybody to turn all around and just say, hey, did you raise your hand? I'll go back there with with you. I'll just be your friend. We'll get one of these books together because nobody walks alone at Reach Church. So everybody just turn to people around you. Say, hey, would you like one of these? Did you raise your hand? Did you want to give your life to Jesus? Come on, I'll go back there with you. Come on, to get one of these booklets, and then you can come back in right after that. But go ahead, be a friend to somebody and say, come on, I'll do this with you. Yeah, we'll step back there together. We'll do this together. Nobody walks alone at Reach Church. Come on, let's give these people a great big hand as they're making these decisions for Jesus. How exciting. Yeah, this is awesome. This is awesome. And as they're doing this, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask our prayer leaders to come down front and just stretch out all across the front here of the stage and facing, people in the audience. Because what we want to do right now is we want to give you the opportunity to receive prayer. Because maybe you're here and you need a miracle from God in your life like we talked about here today, okay? Maybe it's a miracle that you need. Maybe there's a healing, maybe something physical, maybe something mental, maybe a mental healing, maybe emotional healing. Hey, whatever it is, we are here to pray with you, all right? And then maybe you have another need. You're like, well, man, I got something else. It's not a healing. Great. We want to pray with you today. Just for a couple of minutes, the band's going to sing this song. So if you're here and you're like, well, I don't necessarily need prayer, then just worship. Just spend a couple minutes in worship. I'll dismiss this in a second. But everybody else, we're allowing you to come down front to receive prayer and the miracle working power of Jesus. So let's do this together right now. You can begin to come and receive prayer.